My name is Mark Hasselbell. I'm a sound designer from Denmark. This is a technical game audio experiment where I've created a version of Steve Reich's Pendulum music from 1968. In short, I really like working with feedback in the audio domain. I love the unstable and unpredictable results of working with it in various setups and configurations. A series of recent thoughts on audio feedback in game audio systems led me to a very intriguing question. Does Wwise allow for feedback routing? I mean, why would it? It would be a completely understandable lockout done by Audiokinetic, simply refusing any feedback routing setups altogether to make sure users wouldn't accidentally create these feedback loops, which are almost always accidental and can be quite frustrating. But the use of a tool is not always up to its creator. And as it turns out, feedback is possible within Wwise, and has seemingly been a feature, or rather a byproduct, since version 2017.1. which introduced some modularity into 3D buses and auxiliary sends. With this in mind, I realized I could most likely implement Pendulum music in Unity and Wwise. So I did. Pendulum music is realized through suspended microphones being swung by its own cable over a speaker, which is amplifying the microphone signal, resulting in feedback when the microphone passes by the speaker. The swinging of the microphone will gradually lose its momentum. It will slow down, and the time the microphone is within feedback range of the speaker will gradually increase, resulting in longer sustained drones. You multiply this setup into 3 or more microphone speaker pairs, and suddenly you have a very lively dynamic system. The tones and feedback will change, the small bursts of feedback will rhythmically interact with one another, and eventually will dissolve into a cluster of sustained notes. The setup in Wwise is fairly simple. I've created a bus for the feedback and 2 auxiliary sends that was routed into each other, with some limiting and DC offset done to make sure I didn't accidentally blow up my ears. There are 3 separate audio feedback loops, one for each microphone speaker pair, and I've done a little bit of individual tweaking of the feedback loop, slight differences in how the EQ is set up to make sure each feedback loop would be slightly different. In Unity, I simply modeled the setup as it is usually performed, 3 microphones swinging over speakers. By a C# script, I simply calculate the distance from the microphone to the speaker, and after some light scaling of the value, I simply use this to drive an RTPC, which is controlling the volume of the individual feedback buses. When you start off in this little playable scenario, the microphones are hanging statically, waiting to be released. I walk up and I turn on the amplifier. And then I go over and I release the microphones one by one. I'm able to go back to them and freeze them in place if I want to hear a version without that particular microphone, or simply give the microphone a little push. And after a while, the feedback starts to settle into a sustained drone. I can give all the microphones a little push to get the swinging going again, or I can just enjoy it in all its glory. And that's basically it. A fairly different approach would have been necessary if this was to have been a more realistic simulation. I would have to take into account spatial characteristics, the proper crossfeed between the different speakers and microphones, microphone pickup pattern, realistic modeling of how the microphone and speaker would respond to feedback, and so on. There is a lot of instability and non-linearity in an analog feedback loop, and modeling this properly is quite the task. But this time around, it is simply a joyful experiment done to answer the question, is this even possible within game audio? And yes, it is. Is it a worthwhile approach for your game? You'll probably have to do your own experiment to answer that, but probably not. Thanks for listening and watching. Take care. Goodbye.